The courtroom in Manhattan opened to a tense atmosphere on this eighth day of Sean Combs's trial, better known as Diddy. Cameras were still banned inside, but that morning, the whispers were louder than ever. The public, the journalists, the observers, everyone held their breath. The day promised to be explosive, and it did not disappoint. From the very first minutes, the tone was set. Even before the jury entered, the defense attorneys attempted to object to Dr. Don Hugh's testimony, but nothing made it into the public record. That's when Matthew Russell Lee, court reporter for Inner City Press, stepped in. He publicly criticized the lack of transparency, hundreds of exhibits, motions, and documents completely unavailable to the public. An unusual situation, even for someone like him who covers the biggest cases in the Southern District of New York. But once the jury was seated, Special Agent Gerard Ganon resumed his testimony. A member of the Department of Homeland Security, he was one of the agents involved in the dramatic raid on Diddy's mansion on Star Island, Miami. What he described was chilling. He began by listing the items seized: high heels and sexually suggestive items neatly arranged in the main dressing room, 3 cell phones hidden inside a pair of boots, a Gucci bag containing a white plastic bottle with traces of liquid meth and MDMA, pills with a Tesla logo identified as Xanax, a $100 bill with cocaine residue. The most disturbing item? A dark wooden box engraved with the word Puffy. Inside, according to Agent Ganon, were dozens of bottles, 31 of Astroglide lubricant, 25 of baby oil. But that wasn't all. A firearm, an AR-45 model, was found, carefully wrapped in a towel and placed inside a suitcase. The jury sat in silence as Ganon presented the bullets to them. The defense then tried to minimize the impact. One of the attorneys asked Ganon, "Weren't you aware at the time of the raid that Diddy was leaving the country with his daughters?" Objection. But the question hung in the air. They insisted, "Did you know the targets of the investigation wouldn't be present?" Objection overruled. More details emerged. The operation was planned with military precision. Agents arrived by land and sea, using armored vehicles and boats. 80 to 90 agents were involved, Ganon said. Not all at once, he clarified, but enough to secure the scene. 6 people were inside the house. Only one was handcuffed for an extended period. They were not cooperating. Then came the most visual part of the testimony, the display of the seized items. The Gucci bag, the Puffy box, the suitcase containing the weapon. Agent Ganon explained it all. When he showed the photo of the music studio in the guest house, there was a keyboard, a mixing console, and the word love spelled out in jewels. A disturbing echo of Diddy's name change. Love, he had called himself. Even his youngest child was named that. But the image that stuck with everyone was the one sketched by the courtroom artist. Diddy, sitting with his head in his hands, crushed by the weight of the revelations, or already calculating his next move. At that point, the silence in the courtroom was deafening, and that was just the beginning. As Agent Ganon continued, the defense struggled to regain control. One of their arguments: in Florida, many people own firearms, but the judge didn't seem convinced. The sheer number and nature of the seized items spoke for themselves. This wasn't just a Floridian protecting his home. It was a billionaire's mansion turned, as the FBI reportedly described internally, into a mini illegal pharmacy. The defense made a last-ditch effort to remove some of the sensitive photos from the courtroom screen. One of the lawyers even asked that only blurred faces be visible so as not to harm any other individuals, a precaution perhaps, or a sign of quiet panic. Then the day took an unexpected turn when Dr. Don Hughes was called to the stand. A trauma psychologist with clinical and forensic training, she has worked with World War II veterans, treated hundreds of assault victims, and testified in numerous trials. Her expertise was undeniable. When asked, "Why do victims stay?" and swing, her answer was simple but powerful. Deep psychological ties, emotional and mental consequences that most people do not understand. She spoke of constant fear, financial dependence, shame, and a manipulative process called love bombing, where the abuser floods the victim with attention, gifts, and affection, right after humiliating or hitting them. According to her, this cycle destroys self-esteem, and it explains why someone like Cassie, even in public, could appear to stay willingly. It wasn't a choice, it was psychological entrapment. As she spoke, the courtroom hung on every word. She described scenes many victims would recognize, being told where to go, what to wear, who to speak to. She spoke of multiple failed attempts to leave, and the suffocating effect of an environment controlled by a powerful, wealthy, respected man. But she went even further. She spoke of minimization, a mental defense mechanism where victims justify the abuse. He had a bad day. He was drunk. Maybe I provoked him. These thoughts protect in the short term, but imprison in the long run. At that point, the jury was hooked. Even the skeptics tilted their heads, scribbled notes, focused on Dr. Hughes. She was calm, composed. She didn't dramatize. She presented, and it landed hard. Then came a disruption, the unexpected appearance of George Kaplan. Kaplan was Diddy's former personal assistant. Until now, he had refused to testify. He invoked the Fifth Amendment, his right not to self-incriminate. But to everyone's surprise, prosecutors granted him full immunity. The judge signed the agreement. Kaplan read it and signed it too. And just like that, everything shifted. Even though he hadn't yet testified during this session, just seeing him at the witness bench shook the defense. What does he know? What will he say? Why protect him this way? The prosecution was already preparing exhibits to accompany his future statements. The public, the press, even some court staff looked visibly unsettled. Kaplan was the one, according to several sources, who handled the darkest incidents in Diddy's private circle, and now he was about to speak. But it wasn't over. Before the lunch break, Dr. Hughes returned briefly. She addressed one final critical point: traumatic memory. Contrary to popular belief, abuse victims don't always remember events in sequence or with clarity. The memories can be fragmented, hazy, even distorted. But that's exactly what points to real trauma, not lies. The defense tried to challenge her. They brought up malingering, the idea that a witness could fake or exaggerate symptoms. But Dr. Hughes stayed calm. She explained that she was trained to spot deception. And in this case, what she had read, seen, and heard aligned perfectly with known patterns of abuse and coercion. As the break was called, the courtroom remained frozen. The psychologist's words, Kaplan's presence, the photos, the objects, the weapons, it all piled up. Everything seemed to converge. This was no longer just a trial. It was a systematic dismantling of an empire built on silence, fear, and control. When the session resumed, all eyes turned to George Kaplan, now under legal protection, immune, and ready to testify. Though his appearance remained brief that day, his name echoed through the courtroom like a silent warning. The walls were closing in on Diddy. Kaplan confirmed he had received a subpoena. He admitted he had not read the immunity order in full, but his lawyer said he had. The judge asked if he still intended to invoke his right to remain silent. Kaplan said yes, but not for long. The government was already preparing the first pieces of evidence for his upcoming testimony. Meanwhile, Dr. Dawn Hughes was still under fire. Defense attorney Jonathan Bach tried to discredit her. He focused on her previous testimonies, noting she had often testified against men in similar cases. He aimed to paint her as a biased, almost activist expert. But she didn't budge. To each challenge, she calmly responded with scientific facts. She explained her analyses were based on interviews, medical records, and cross-observations. She reminded the court that every victim is unique, but that abuse patterns are often the same. She described traumatic bonding, a toxic attachment between victim and abuser, mixing fear, hope, and confusion. She also discussed PTSD, survival strategies, and cognitive dissonance, the mental twist that pushes victims to justify the unjustifiable. In the audience, it was clear her message landed. Several jurors nodded. Some wrote furiously. The room was tense, but fully engaged. Then, an unexpected event. The defense, thinking it could undermine the case, repeatedly mentioned a woman, Gina Hahn, identified as the third alleged victim. But Hahn now refused to testify. Yet by naming her so often, the defense opened a door. The judge ultimately allowed her written statements to be read aloud in lieu of physical presence. It shocked the room. Gina described psychological control, sexual violence, being forcibly relocated to an island, cut off from the media, right after cooperating with authorities. She spoke of strategic isolation, a planned disappearance meant to keep her from the justice system. And when the defense tried to minimize her words, they made a fatal slip. One of the attorneys accidentally revealed that they knew Gina's current location, something the prosecution officially did not. Tension filled the air. Whispers echoed through the room. The judge took note. If the defense knew where Gina was, it raised serious questions. Was she being watched, threatened, prevented from appearing? In a case where every silence feels suspicious, this revelation hit like a thunderclap. And just as the chaos settled, one last rumor spread. Kid Cudi's testimony was imminent. His name was spoken with caution, almost fearfully. Kid Cudi had once claimed publicly that Diddy blew up his car. He said so right after Cassie filed her lawsuit. And if he confirmed that from the stand, it would be one of the trial's most explosive moments. Meanwhile, the federal prosecutor remained quiet. But behind the scenes, the wheels were turning. Two new witnesses, both reportedly close to Diddy's personal security, were expected to be called in the coming days. Two men who had, until now, stayed in the shadows. The day drew to a close. The lights dimmed. The judge adjourned. But no one really moved. The room remained frozen, as if the weight of the day's revelations was only just beginning to sink in. Diddy stayed quiet, head down, expressionless. Outside, journalists rushed to their cameras. News stations were already broadcasting the latest updates. In the streets of New York, a murmur rose. What if this really is the beginning of the end? Day 9 promises to be decisive. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Don't forget to like and share to support us. See you next time.